When we talk about huge, complicated topics like climate change, how do we really know what the media is paying attention to? And that's a massive question, right? Because whatever gets the spotlight can end up shaping everything from policy and markets to what we all think. So let's get into it and see if there's a better way to track all this. All right, so let's start with the big fundamental problem here. How do you actually measure something as fuzzy as attention? How do you quantify the importance of an idea when you're looking at thousands, even millions of words? It's way trickier than it sounds. For the longest time, the go-to method was pretty basic. Just count keywords. How many times does an article mention climate change or carbon emissions? But here's the thing, that method has a massive flaw. It tells you if a word shows up, but it tells you absolutely nothing about its importance or context. It's kind of like using a sledgehammer for a problem that needs a scalpel. I love this analogy because it just hits the nail on the head, right? Just because a character's name is in the script 100 times doesn't mean they're the hero of the movie. They could just be a background character everyone talks about. To get the plot, you need to know who's actually driving the story. And it's the exact same thing with ideas in the news. So, this is the exact problem that a group of researchers wanted to solve. They decided to build a brand new tool, something designed to go way beyond that simple word count to measure what's really capturing our attention. And here it is. It's called the Climate and Environmental Attention Index, or CEI for short. Now, the really cool part, the secret sauce, is that it measures a topic's semantic importance. In other words, it's finally figuring out which topics are the stars of the show and which ones are just, well, part of the scenery. So how on earth does it actually do that? It sounds pretty complicated, but let's pop the hood and take a quick look at how this thing is built. It's actually pretty clever.
Okay, so the system crunched a massive amount of data. We're talking over 700,000 news articles. And for every single topic, it measures 3 key things. First, you've got prevalence. That's your classic word count. Easy enough. But then it gets smart. It looks at diversity. Is this topic connected to lots of other unique ideas? And finally, connectivity. Does this topic act like a bridge, connecting different conversations that might otherwise be separate? When you put those 3 together, you get a much, much richer picture of what's truly important.
So they took all these keywords, 823 of them, and organized them into these 3 main pillars, or you could think of them as big buckets. The transition pillar is all about policy, stuff like the Paris Agreement or energy rules. The physical pillar is about what's actually happening to the planet, heat waves, emissions, that kind of thing. And the opportunities pillar looks at the positive side, like green jobs and renewable energy. This structure really lets them see the big picture. But here's what makes this index a real game changer. It's incredibly dynamic. See, instead of having fixed weights, it uses a method that lets the data itself decide what's most important each and every week. So if there's a huge story about renewable energy one week, that topic automatically becomes more important in the index. That means it's super responsive to what's actually happening in the world. Okay, so we've got this powerful new tool. What happens when you point it at almost a decade of news articles? Well, what the researchers found was fascinating and a little bit shocking. It turns out when it comes to climate news, we're basically living in 2 completely different worlds. All right, have a look at this. We've got 2 heat maps here. The one on the left shows the topics that are important in financial newspapers. The one on the right is from general news. Each little line is a topic, and the brighter the color, the more central it was that week. Just look at the difference. The financial news on the left is exploding with these sharp, bright flashes of red. Now compare that to the general news on the right. It's much more consistent, cooler, right? The financial news just looks a lot more frantic. And that's because it is frantic. The financial news coverage spikes like crazy. It's reacting to very specific events that can move the market. The big topics here are all about the bottom line: net zero commitments, gas emissions, energy regulations, green financial products. This is the climate story told specifically for investors. Now, flip over to the general news, and it's a totally different story. The attention is way more stable, more of a slow burn, and it's spread out across a much wider range of topics. Here, the focus is on these long-term societal concerns: how we manage waste, how we build resilient communities, the big idea of sustainability, and education. This is the climate story told for the rest of us. So what we have are 2 completely different narratives being told to 2 completely different audiences. Okay, so what? Why does this split even matter in the real world? Oh, it matters a lot. Because different stories literally create different realities. If you're an investor, you're hearing a story about risk, regulation, and money. If you're part of the general public, you're getting a much broader story about society and the environment. And the policymakers? They're stuck right in the middle, trying to build a bridge between these two worlds. The biggest takeaway here is that there is no single climate change story in the news. The version you get depends entirely on where you're looking.
And that leaves us with one last really big question to think about. If our news sources are telling us fundamentally different stories about the climate, and those stories shape what we think is important, which one of those stories is actually shaping our future?